She defended an elderly dowager from public shame, never knowing she was the Duke's mother. Hello, everyone, and welcome. On a bitter market morning in Belhaven, one quiet young woman would make a choice that seemed small enough to vanish beneath the noise of carts, church bells, and winter wind. Yet some choices refuse to disappear. They follow us home, demand a price, and place our lives on roads we never intended to travel. If stories of dignity, wounded hearts, and unexpected grace speak to you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps these stories continue to grow. Clara Whitmore had learned long ago that poverty was easiest to bear when no one could see it. At 25, she owned 3 dresses fit for public view, 2 serviceable pairs of shoes, and a gift with a needle that kept bread on her table and coal in the grate of her narrow rented room. That morning, she crossed Belhaven Square carrying a paper-wrapped parcel of altered gowns for Mrs. Margaret Doyle's dress shop, her dark chestnut hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet and her worn blue-gray wool dress brushed until no lint remained. The market was already crowded. Farmers called over baskets of winter apples, shopkeepers swept frost from their thresholds, and ladies in fur-trimmed cloaks passed servants hurrying beneath heavier burdens. Clara was nearly beyond the fountain when a man's voice cut across the square. "You have mistaken stubbornness for importance, madam." Harrison Vale stood outside the produce stalls, broad beneath an expensive brown coat, one gloved hand resting upon his silver-headed cane. Everyone in Belhaven knew him. He owned the bank, sat on the town council, and possessed the particular confidence of a man whose displeasure could close doors. Before him stood an elderly woman in a plain charcoal cloak. Silver blonde hair showed beneath her bonnet, and though she was small, she held herself with such composure that Harrison's contempt made him appear vulgar rather than powerful. Beside them, an old vegetable seller knelt gathering potatoes scattered over the frozen stones. The man was short-changed. The woman said calmly, "I watched your clerk count the coins." Harrison laughed. Several people nearby followed, though none looked amused. And Belhaven must now conduct its business according to wandering old women. According to fairness would be sufficient. Something tightened in Clara's chest. She knew the silence around them. It was the silence of people who recognized cruelty but understood exactly what opposing it could cost. Harrison stepped nearer. "You should remember your place before you embarrass yourself further." The vegetable seller lowered his eyes. The elderly woman lifted her chin, but Clara saw her fingers close once around the edge of her cloak. That small movement decided everything. Clara set her parcel beside the fountain. The paper loosened against the stone without her noticing. "Mr. Vale." Heads turned. Harrison stared at her as though furniture had spoken. Clara's pulse beat painfully beneath her collar, but her voice remained steady. If a woman's place is determined by whether she tells the truth, perhaps she is standing exactly where she ought to. The square fell quiet. "And who are you?" Harrison demanded. Someone who heard what was said. "Then you heard interference in business that did not concern her." Clara glanced at the scattered potatoes and the old seller's trembling hands. "I heard her object when a poorer man was treated unfairly. That concerns anyone who still believes dignity should not be purchased by the pound." A murmur traveled through the crowd. Harrison's mouth hardened. "Be careful, Miss Whitmore." Clara gave him the name despite the warning already forming in her mind. Clara Whitmore. Recognition flickered. He knew Doyle's shop. More importantly, he knew which families ordered from it, which merchants supplied it on credit, and which accounts passed through his bank. "Miss Whitmore," he repeated softly. People who earn their living from respectable households should take greater care not to insult them. The threat was dressed as advice. Clara thought of Margaret, of winter orders already promised, of rent due in 9 days. Fear arrived then, quiet and practical. She did not withdraw. When the elderly woman's glove slipped to the stones, Clara bent, retrieved it, and offered her embroidered handkerchief to brush away the dirt. "Respectability," Clara said, looking back at Harrison, "should survive being asked to behave respectfully." His cheeks darkened. He ordered his clerk to correct the vegetable seller's payment, then strode away without another word. No one applauded. Clara was grateful. Applause would have cost nothing. The elderly woman studied her with clear blue eyes. "You may have made an enemy for the sake of a stranger." Clara managed a tired smile. "Then I hope the stranger was worth it." She lifted her parcel. unaware that a small silver pin box dropped from the woman's cloak into the loosened fold of wrapping paper before Clara gathered it closed. At the far end of the square, Harrison Vale stopped and looked back. Not angrily now, thoughtfully, as though calculating exactly how much courage a young seamstress could afford. Clara had not gone 20 steps when the elderly woman called after her. "Miss Whitmore." Clara turned. The woman stood beside the fountain, one hand pressed briefly against the stone ledge while the wind pulled at her charcoal cloak. The color had faded from her face. "Are you unwell?" Clara asked, only old enough to resent the cold. The answer was dry, but the woman's fingers trembled. Clara looked toward Doyle's shop at the far end of the street. Margaret would already be wondering where the delivery had gone, and Harrison Vale's warning still sat heavily in her mind. Leaving now would be sensible. Instead, she shifted the parcel beneath her arm. "There is a tea room nearby. And you have work. Work will survive 10 minutes. Will your employer?" Clara almost smiled. "That remains uncertain." They had barely reached the edge of the square when a dark carriage stopped beside them. A tall man stepped down before the driver could open the door. His charcoal coat was severe rather than fashionable, his shoulders rigid beneath it, his steel blue eyes fixed immediately on the older woman. "There you are." Relief crossed his face and vanished beneath irritation. "You left without an escort." "I left a note." 3 words. 3 accurate words. Clara glanced between them. Family, certainly. But there was something else in the man's bearing, an expectation that the world would arrange itself once he spoke. "Everett," the woman said, "before you decide whether to scold me all the way home, Miss Whitmore needs to be returned to Doyle's dress shop." Clara stiffened. "I can walk. You have already lost enough time because of me. That was my choice. And getting you back safely will be mine." Everett's gaze moved to Clara. "You are the woman from the square." It was not quite a question. "I am the woman trying to get back to work." Something almost like impatience touched his expression. "Then the carriage is faster. And favors are rarely free." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You believe a ride requires repayment?" "I believe powerful people often forget when something feels like a favor only because they can afford the cost." The elderly woman became very quiet. Everett looked at Clara for a long moment, then opened the carriage door himself. "Then consider it my responsibility, not your debt. My mother delayed you. I will return you." Clara caught the word mother, but nothing else in his tone suggested explanation. She hesitated. Pride told her to refuse. Duty reminded her that Margaret was waiting with finished gowns that should already have been delivered. Clara climbed inside without taking Everett's offered hand. His eyebrow lifted, but he said nothing. The older woman settled beside her, and Everett sat opposite. The difference between them felt sharper inside the carriage. Clara's worn blue-gray wool brushed velvet upholstery. Everett's gloves were finer than anything in Margaret's shop. Yet he did not look at her clothes. He looked at her face. "You knew Vale could damage your livelihood," he said. "Yes. And you spoke anyway. Someone had to. No one else did. That does not make silence correct." The carriage rocked over frozen stones. Everett glanced toward his mother. "You should not have been alone." "I was not alone when it mattered." His jaw tightened. Clara heard the wound beneath the argument then, not arrogance alone, but fear disguised as control. It made her revise him by half an inch. "She was not careless," Clara said quietly. Everett looked back at her. "You barely know her." "I know she noticed injustice when everyone else was pretending not to." His expression shifted. "That is precisely what concerns me." Before Clara could ask what he meant, the carriage stopped outside Doyle's shop. Margaret stood beneath the awning with 2 unopened parcels beside her. Clara's stomach dropped. "Those came back." Margaret nodded. "Mrs. Pembroke canceled everything. The Harcourts as well." Everett stepped down behind Clara. "Because of the square?" Margaret hesitated. Clara answered first. "That is not your concern. It became my concern when my family's delay helped put you here. Your family did not cancel those orders." "No, but I will not pretend responsibility ends where convenience does." Clara turned fully toward him. The certainty in his voice still irritated her, but this time it was directed at himself. That was new. Before she could respond, the older woman leaned from the carriage window, Clara's embroidered handkerchief folded carefully in her gloved hand. "Everett," she said softly, "do not solve this for her." His gaze remained on Clara. After a pause, he inclined his head. "Then I will ask instead. Miss Whitmore, what do you need? The question unsettled her far more than an order would have. Clara held Everett's gaze for a moment, unsettled by the simplicity of the question. What did she need? The honest answer was dangerous. Work. Time. Customers who were not afraid of Harrison Vale. A winter in which Margaret did not have to choose between paying the fabric supplier and keeping coal in the shop stove. But Clara had learned that naming a need before powerful people could turn it into leverage was its own kind of risk. Nothing from you, she said. Everett's expression barely changed. That was not what I asked. It is the answer I can give. Margaret touched Clara's sleeve. Inside, dear. Clara carried the parcel through the shop door, where the familiar smell of wool, starch, and lavender should have steadied her. It did not. The two canceled gowns lay across the cutting table like accusations. Margaret closed the door. Behind them, Mrs. Pembroke was 6 weeks of work. The Harcourts nearly another month. Clara began loosening the paper around her delivery parcel. Then reduce my wages until we replace them. You barely earn enough now. The shop should not pay for something I chose to do. Margaret's eyes softened. And if I refuse? Then I will be very difficult until you reconsider. A small metallic sound interrupted them. Something slipped from a fold in the loosened wrapping paper, struck the table leg, and rolled beneath it. Clara bent and retrieved a silver-pinned box no larger than her palm. A faint crest had been engraved into the lid. She frowned. This was not in the parcel when I packed it. Margaret examined it. Then someone lost it in the square. Clara remembered setting the gowns beside the fountain. The older woman's cloak. The glove that had fallen. It must belong to Everett's mother. Before Margaret could answer, the shop door opened. Everett stood on the threshold alone. I owe you an apology. Clara straightened. For what? Listening when I was not invited to. He glanced toward the returned gowns. Your walls are thinner than Alderwick's. Most things are. Something almost amused moved through his eyes, but disappeared quickly. I also came because my mother believes responsibility requires more than asking what you need and accepting the first answer you give. Clara's defenses rose again. If this is about money, it is about work. He placed a folded note on the counter. Several of my mother's winter garments require alterations before the charitable season. Mrs. Doyle may inspect them and set her usual rate. Margaret looked at Clara before touching the paper. That is a substantial commission. Then it should be treated as one. Nothing more. Clara studied Everett. How fortunate that your household suddenly discovered damaged clothes. His face hardened slightly. You believe I invented them? I believe wealthy men sometimes disguise rescue as business because it allows everyone to preserve their pride. Everett did not answer immediately. Clara expected offense. Instead, he removed his gloves with slow precision and set them on the counter. And I believe pride can become another person's burden when we insist on carrying everything alone. The word struck too close. Clara glanced toward Margaret, toward the canceled orders, toward the ledger beneath the counter. Duty demanded that she consider what pride wanted to reject. Everett seemed to read the conflict without enjoying it. The commission exists whether you take it or not, he said. If Mrs. Doyle refuses, Thomas Reed will send the garments elsewhere. Thomas Reed, Margaret repeated. Your steward? Everett's silence lasted half a beat too long. Clara noticed. Steward. Not clerk. Not household secretary. Something about the carriage, the coat, the way even Harrison's name had failed to impress him began arranging itself in her mind. She looked down at the silver box in her hand. Then perhaps you can return this. Everett's eyes went immediately to it. For the first time since she had met him, his composure visibly slipped. Where did you find that? Inside my parcel. It must have fallen into the wrapping paper when I set it beside the fountain. He took one step closer, then stopped himself. It belongs to my mother. Clara held it out. Everett did not take it. You should return it yourself. Why? His gaze settled on her with an expression she could not yet name. Not authority. Not suspicion. Something closer to reluctant respect, complicated by a truth he had not decided how to tell her. Because, he said quietly, you defended her without asking who she was. I think she owes you the courtesy of answering that question herself. Clara looked from the engraved crest to Everett's face. Pride told her to send the box with him and close the door on whatever world stood beyond Belhaven. Compassion reminded her of the older woman's trembling hand. Duty reminded her that Margaret needed the commission. Clara closed her fingers around the silver box. Then I will bring it tomorrow. Everett inclined his head once. I will make certain she is expecting you. Only after he left did Clara realize Margaret had gone completely silent. What? Clara asked. Margaret stared toward the closed door. Nothing, she said too quickly. Then her eyes dropped to the crest in Clara's hand. Only that I suspect tomorrow is going to be considerably more complicated than you think. Clara reached Alderwick Hall shortly before noon with the silver pin box wrapped in plain muslin inside her work bag. The road beyond Belhaven rose through bare winter fields until the house appeared above the trees, its gray stone walls severe beneath a colorless sky. She stopped at the gates. For the first time since Everett had entered Doyle's shop, every small detail she had ignored began to feel deliberate. The carriage, Thomas Reed being called a steward, Everett's certainty that doors would open when he approached them. Pride urged her to leave the box with a servant and return to the life she understood. Duty carried her to the entrance. Thomas received her beneath a vaulted hall lined with portraits. Miss Whitmore, Her Grace is expecting you. Clara's hand tightened around her work bag. Her Grace. Thomas hesitated only a moment. The Dowager Duchess. Before Clara could ask another question, a familiar voice came from the drawing room. Thomas, do not soften the consequence of my own poor judgment. The elderly woman from the square appeared in the doorway. She wore deep plum silk instead of charcoal wool, pearls at her throat, her silver blonde hair arranged beneath a lace cap. Yet her clear blue eyes were exactly the same. Miss Whitmore, she said gently. My name is Eleanor Caldwell, Dowager Duchess of Alderwick. The silence seemed to widen around Clara. She thought of Harrison Vale calling her a wandering old woman, of the fallen potatoes, of the handkerchief offered without hesitation. Then she understood what Everett had allowed her to discover for herself. And Everett? She asked. Eleanor's expression softened. My son. Clara turned. Everett stood near the library doors, dressed simply in dark wool, one hand resting against the back of a chair. Rank no longer needed explanation. Duke of Alderwick, Clara said. Yes. There was no triumph in his answer. That helped, though not enough. Clara crossed to Eleanor and placed the wrapped pin box on the table. This belongs to you. Eleanor opened the muslin and touched the silver lid with visible relief. My husband gave me this 39 years ago. Clara's anger weakened by a degree. Then I am glad it found its way back. Eleanor studied her. You are angry with me. I am trying to decide whether I have the right to be. You do. Everett stepped forward. Mother went into Belhaven without escort because she believes people behave differently when they do not recognize her. Eleanor gave him a pointed look. And because I dislike being followed like a state prisoner. You disappeared for 4 hours. I went shopping. You caused Thomas to consider sending men into 3 counties. Clara almost smiled, then stopped herself. Beneath their disagreement, she recognized something she had heard in Everett before. Fear translated into control. Eleanor looked back at Clara. I did not deceive you in order to test you. I wanted one morning in which no one bowed before deciding whether I was worth hearing. Clara understood that more than she wanted to. And now everyone in Belhaven may decide I helped you because I knew exactly who you were. Everett's face hardened. They would be wrong. Wrong opinions still close shops. He absorbed that without argument. Then we make certain the work between our households cannot be mistaken for a gift. Thomas placed a folder on the table. Inside was a formal commission listing each garment, the required alterations, delivery dates, and a blank line for Margaret's quoted rates. Clara looked up. You prepared a contract. You said favors are rarely free. Everett's gaze held hers. So this is not a favor. For the first time, Clara felt the ground between them change. He had not merely heard her resistance. He had adjusted his behavior because of it. She examined the terms carefully. Mrs. Doyle sets the rate. Yes. No exclusive arrangement. None. And if our work is poor, you lose the commission like anyone else. Clara closed the folder. Then I will take these terms to Mrs. Doyle. If she agrees, the shop will accept. Everett inclined his head. That is all I ask. Eleanor released a breath that sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. Clara glanced at Everett again. He had offered work without demanding gratitude, terms without hidden ownership, and now even acceptance remained in Margaret's hands. It was a small thing, perhaps, but Clara had learned that character often revealed itself most clearly in the choices people refused to take from others. Thomas returned before anyone could speak again, carrying a sealed note. Your Grace. This came from Belhaven. Everett broke the seal. As he read, the warmth disappeared from his expression. What is it? Eleanor asked. His gaze moved to Clara. Harrison Vale is telling people you knew my mother's identity before you entered the square. Clara felt the room go cold. Everett folded the letter once. It seems, he said quietly, someone has decided your kindness must be made to look like ambition. Clara read the note once, then again, though the words did not change. By afternoon, Harrison Vale's version of the morning in Belhaven had already become more elegant than the truth. According to him, Clara had recognized the Dowager Duchess immediately, staged her intervention for public notice, and then accepted private access to Alderwick Hall as payment. Then Doyle's shop should withdraw from the commission, Clara said. Everett's expression sharpened. No, if I continue working here, every delivery becomes evidence for him. Evidence of what? That my mother owns dresses? Evidence does not have to be true once enough people enjoy believing it. Eleanor set down her teacup. If you leave because Harrison Vale has ordered society to misunderstand you, then he has succeeded without proving anything. Clara turned toward her. And if I stay, Margaret may lose every respectable customer she has left. Then the decision belongs to Margaret, Everett said. Not Vale. Not me. And not your fear of what others might say. Clara looked at him. You think this is fear? I think it is responsibility wearing fear's coat. The words stung because they were close enough to truth. Clara's first instinct was to leave Alderwick immediately, sever the connection, and spare Margaret further damage. But that would mean deciding Margaret's future for her in the name of protection, the same habit Clara resented in Everett. She lowered her eyes to the formal commission. I will speak with Margaret before anything is cancelled. Everett inclined his head. Good. That is not agreement with you. I am learning to survive the distinction. Eleanor hid a smile. The following morning, Thomas delivered the first 3 gowns to Doyle's shop. Margaret read the formal commission Clara had brought from Alderwick twice before examining each garment, turning sleeves, checking seams, and noting the work in the margin with the blunt end of a pencil. At last she pushed the papers back toward Clara. We keep it. Clara stared at her. You could lose customers. I already lost customers because Harrison Vale told them to leave. I would rather lose business for doing honest work than keep it by letting him choose who deserves employment. Clara felt her throat tighten. Margaret, do not protect me by taking away my decision. The echo was unmistakable. Clara laughed once despite herself. Apparently, everyone has decided to become difficult. You began it. By noon, Clara returned to Alderwick carrying the first 3 gowns, Margaret's signed rates, her measuring kit, and notes for Eleanor's first fitting. The south sitting room had been cleared near the windows, sunlight falling across folded wool and dark silk. Eleanor stood patiently while Clara pinned a sleeve and marked the waist of a plum walking dress with tailor's chalk. Everett entered only once, carrying correspondence, and paused when he saw Clara working. You stayed. Clara did not look up. Mrs. Doyle stayed. I honored her decision. That sounds suspiciously like trust. Do not become unbearable. I will make an effort. The exchange was brief, but Eleanor noticed the quiet ease beneath it. So did someone else. Lady Lenora Pierce arrived an hour later with 2 members of the Belhaven Winter Relief Committee. She entered in pale gray silk, graceful and perfectly composed, then stopped when she saw Clara's measuring tape beside Eleanor's chair. Miss Whitmore, Lenora said warmly. Belhaven has been speaking of you. Clara threaded a needle through the fabric she was marking. Belhaven appears. Unusually energetic this week. Lenora smiled. People are simply curious how quickly chance acquaintances become useful ones. The room went still. Clara could have defended herself. Before she did, Everett stepped away from the window. Then their curiosity may end here. Doyle's shop was retained by my household under written contract, at my request, after Miss Whitmore had already suffered financial consequences for assisting my mother. Lenora's smile weakened. Everett, surely no one meant, I do. His voice remained quiet. Anyone suggesting Miss Whitmore sought access to this house is accusing her of something I know to be false. Clara looked at him. He had made his position public before women who carried reputations through Belhaven faster than newspapers carried facts. He knew exactly what that would invite. Lenora did too. How noble, she said softly. Accuracy requires very little nobility, Everett replied. The committee visit continued, strained but outwardly polite. When the last carriage departed, Clara found Everett alone in the entrance hall. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. You may have made this worse. For whom? She had no immediate answer. Everett lowered his voice. I have spent most of my life believing position exists so that problems can be controlled. You have made control seem considerably less impressive than choosing where to stand. Clara felt something shift inside her. Not romance. Not yet, but the dangerous beginning of believing him. Thomas appeared from the study holding a folded report. Your Grace, I checked the timing of Mr. Vale's claims. Everett took the paper, and Thomas glanced toward Clara. Mrs. Pembroke canceled her order before anyone outside the square could reasonably have known that the woman Miss Whitmore defended was the Dowager Duchess. Clara went still. Everett unfolded the report. Then the punishment came first, he said quietly. Thomas nodded. And the story about ambition came afterward. For the first time, Clara understood that Harrison Vale had not merely spread a rumor. Someone had rewritten the reason for destroying her livelihood after the original revenge had already begun. Everett read Thomas's report in silence. Mrs. Pembroke received a message from Vale's office less than an hour after the incident in the square, Thomas said. At that point, no one outside the market could have known the woman Miss Whitmore defended was the Dowager Duchess. Clara felt the meaning settle with quiet precision. So he punished me for contradicting him. Yes, Thomas said. The story about ambition came later. Everett's gaze hardened. After Lady Pierce visited Belhaven, Clara remembered Lenora's careful smile, the sweetness with which she had suggested chance acquaintances could become useful ones. What had seemed like elegant cruelty now looked more deliberate. She gave him a better reason, Clara said. A respectable reason, Eleanor replied. People forgive retaliation less easily than they forgive scandal. Thomas nodded. Vale made Miss Whitmore expensive to employ. Lady Pierce made her shameful to defend. The revelation should have brought Clara relief. Instead, it left her cold. Harrison's anger she understood. Lenora's motive disturbed her more, because Clara had done nothing except enter a room Everett already occupied. Why would Lady Pierce care so much? She asked. Silence answered first. Everett looked toward the window. Eleanor looked at her son. Clara understood before he spoke. There has been an expectation, Everett said carefully, that Lenora and I might eventually marry. Clara kept her face still. An expectation from whom? Belhaven. Certain families. Perhaps Lenora herself. And from you. Everett met her eyes. No. The answer came quickly enough to hurt more than it should have. Clara disliked that realization. Then this has nothing to do with me. It does if someone is injuring you because of what they imagine about me. Then perhaps I should remove myself from the imagination. Everett's expression changed. By leaving Alderwick? By finishing the commission and not returning. Eleanor started to speak, but Clara shook her head. Please. Margaret has already lost enough because of one decision I made in the square. A decision to stop a man humiliating someone. Everett said. Do not make decency sound like recklessness. You do not understand. Then explain it. Clara almost refused. Pride had protected her for years by making silence easier than exposure. But something in his tone had changed. He was not demanding an answer. He was asking for one. My father once accepted help from a creditor, she said quietly. After his business failed. Everett said nothing. The first loan was generous. The second came with advice. Then came conditions. Which suppliers he should use. What he should sell. When he should sell the house. By the end, everyone still called it assistance, but my father no longer made a single decision that was truly his. Clara looked down at her hands. So when someone offers help without a price, I look for the price that has not been written yet. Everett's expression lost its severity. For the first time, he seemed to understand that her resistance was not contempt for him. It was memory. And I have been asking you to trust terms you cannot see, he said. Sometimes. Then I have been unfair. Clara looked at him. You have also been trying. The admission surprised them both. Before either could say more, the front bell rang. Thomas returned moments later carrying a sealed envelope. This was delivered to Doyle's shop and redirected here. Clara recognized the seal of Vale Bank. She opened it. Margaret Doyle's business loan had been called due in full within 10 days. Everett's voice went cold. I can settle it today. No, Clara's answer was immediate. His eyes closed briefly, But when he opened them, there was no anger. Because of your father. Because of myself. What if I lend it under written terms? Then half of Belhaven will say I defended your mother for exactly this. Everett stepped back, absorbing the refusal rather than fighting it. What do you want me to do? Clara looked at him, startled. The old Everett would have decided. This man waited. Find out whether Vale has the legal right to call the loan. Nothing more. Nothing more. Everett nodded once. Then, that is what I will do. Thomas unfolded a second sheet. Mrs. Doyle kept every payment receipt and the original agreement. Clara's eyes lifted. Thomas continued, if the account is current, Vale may have made a mistake. Everett looked at the bank letter, then at Clara. Or he may have made something more useful than a mistake. By 10 the next morning, Clara stood inside Vale Bank with Margaret's payment receipts tied in blue thread beneath her arm. Everett had offered to send Thomas a loan. Clara refused. If my name is the reason this began, she said, then my name will be present when it ends. Harrison Vale received them in his private office with the composure of a man who still believed walls, ledgers, and titles belonged to him. Your Grace. Miss Whitmore. This seems excessive for a simple business matter. Clara placed the receipts on his desk. Then it should be simple to explain. Thomas opened the original loan agreement. Every installment is current. Acceleration is permitted only after 60 days of default or material fraud. Vale barely glanced at the document. A lender may reassess risk. Not by changing what the borrower has already paid, Clara said. Vale's mouth tightened. You overestimate your importance. Then why did Mrs. Pembroke cancel her order before anyone outside the square knew who I had defended? For the first time, his eyes moved too quickly. Thomas placed a signed statement beside the receipts. Mrs. Pembroke confirms that your office advised her to withdraw her business from Doyle's shop less than an hour after the market incident. Everett said nothing. Clara noticed. Only days earlier, he would have taken control of the room because control was what men like him had been taught to call responsibility. Now he stood beside her and waited. Vale looked toward him anyway. Surely you do not intend to let a seamstress interrogate me in my own bank. Everett's answer was quiet. She asked the question. You may answer her. Something in Clara steadied. Vale leaned back. I warned respectable households that Miss Whitmore had shown poor judgment. Before you knew the Dowager Duchess was involved, Clara said. Which means the punishment came before the story about ambition. The office door opened sharply. Lady Lenora Pierce entered without waiting to be announced, pale gray. Silk severe against the dark wood. Harrison, I received your message. She stopped when she saw Clara. Vale's confidence faltered by a fraction. Clara understood at once. He had summoned Lenora because the story they had built together was beginning to collapse. Thomas placed another sheet on the desk. Lady Pierce visited Vale Bank the morning after Miss Whitmore first went to Alderwick Hall. The wording of the rumor changed that same afternoon. Lenora's face remained composed. Coincidence is not conspiracy. No, Clara said. But sequence matters. Before Lenora could reply, a young clerk appeared in the doorway clutching a ledger. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. Mr. Vale, I cannot alter the Doyle account. Vale rose. Leave. The clerk stayed. The payments were posted. You instructed me yesterday to mark the account delinquent anyway. The room went still. Thomas took the ledger and opened it beside Margaret's receipts. The dates matched. Not rumor. Not interpretation. Ink. Vale's face reddened. You foolish boy. Everett moved then, but Clara lifted one hand. He stopped. That, more than anything, showed how much had changed between them. Clara looked at Vale. You punished me because I contradicted you. Then Lady Pierce helped turn that punishment into a story Belhaven would enjoy repeating. Lenora's control finally cracked. I was protecting what everyone understood to be a suitable future. With Everett? Clara asked. Lenora's eyes flashed. With the Duke of Alderwick. The distinction told Clara everything. Everett stepped forward. There was never an engagement. There was an understanding. An expectation is not a promise. Vale turned desperately toward him. Your Grace, if you withdraw the Caldwell accounts, this bank will suffer. Everett's face became colder than anger. I could withdraw them before sunset. Vale paled. Clara knew what that would mean. Not only ruin for Harrison, but fear among depositors, merchants, widows, laborers, families whose savings had nothing to do with her. Do not, she said. Everett looked at her. He tried to destroy Margaret's shop. Then let the evidence destroy his authority, not innocent. People's security. Clara, you asked me yesterday what I wanted you to do. Silence settled over the office. Everett remembered. So did she. Clara continued. I want the records preserved. I want the council informed. I want every borrower whose account he altered to be reviewed. And I want Mrs. Doyle's loan restored exactly as written. Nothing more because of me. Nothing less because of him. Everett held her gaze for a long moment, then turned to Thomas. Do it exactly as Miss Whitmore said. Vale stared at him. You would let her decide this? Everett looked back at Clara. It is her reputation you tried to purchase with fear. I will not take her choice from her in order to defend it. The words struck deeper than any romantic declaration could have. Clara had spent years believing power always came with hidden terms. Everett had just used his power to surrender control of her fate back to her. Thomas closed the ledger. The Winter Relief Committee meets publicly tomorrow evening. Mrs. Pembroke is willing to speak. The clerk will testify to the entries. Mrs. Doyle has the receipts. Lenora went very still. And the Dowager Duchess? Thomas asked. Everett's expression changed. My mother has been waiting for Belhaven to hear what actually happened in that square. Clara looked toward the bank windows, where winter light lay cold across the glass. By tomorrow night, Harrison and Lenora would no longer be able to choose which version of her kindness survived. But for the first time, Clara understood that clearing her name would require something more difficult than defeating a lie. She would have to stand before the society that had judged her and let the truth speak without allowing Everett's title to speak louder. The Winter Relief Committee gathered beneath the chandeliers of Belhaven Assembly Hall the following evening, but the room no longer felt like a place where Clara's fate would be decided by whispers. Too much had already been preserved in receipts, ledgers, statements, and signatures for rumor to move freely now. Clara entered beside Margaret, carrying only her gloves and the knowledge that this time she had chosen to come. Everett arrived, separately with Eleanor and Thomas. He did not cross the room to stand beside Clara. He had understood what she meant at the bank. If the truth was going to restore her name, it could not appear to arrive on a duke's arm. Harrison Vale stood near the committee chairman, visibly diminished but still attempting dignity. Lenora Pierce remained by the windows in pale gray silk, though none of the women near her seemed eager to speak. The chairman called the meeting to order. Harrison rose first. A private banking disagreement has been inflated into a social spectacle. Clara heard Margaret inhale beside her. She stepped forward before anger could answer for either of them. It became a social matter when your office instructed customers to abandon Mrs. Doyle's shop. Harrison turned toward her. You continue to mistake consequence for persecution. No, Clara said. I learned the difference when your own records did. Thomas submitted the documents already verified at Vale Bank, while the young bank clerk and Mrs. Pembroke confirmed the dates before the committee. The effect was quieter than a gasp and far more damaging. People stopped looking at Harrison as though another explanation might save him. Lenora stepped forward. None of that proves Miss Whitmore did not recognize her grace in the square. Clara felt the old fear rise. This time it did not own her. She looked toward Eleanor. The Dowager Duchess did not wait to be summoned. She crossed the room slowly and stood before the committee table, not beside her son. Miss Whitmore did not know me, Eleanor said. She believed I was an elderly woman dressed plainly and being humiliated because I objected to a poor man being cheated. Lenora's lips tightened. With respect, your grace, gratitude may color memory. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Then perhaps an object will assist it. She drew Clara's embroidered hawthorn handkerchief from her reticule. She gave me this before she knew my name. She refused payment after she learned it. She tried to leave Alderwick rather than risk appearing to profit from knowing me. Eleanor looked around the room. If ambition was her design, she pursued it with remarkable determination to gain nothing. A few restrained smiles appeared, but Clara did not smile. She was watching Everett. He remained near the rear of the hall, allowing Eleanor and the evidence to carry the truth. That restraint mattered. Lenora turned toward him. Everett, are you truly going to allow this woman to overturn years of understanding? Everett stepped forward only then. There were years of assumption. There was no promise. You know what was expected. I do. His voice remained calm. That is why I should have corrected it sooner. The admission shifted the room more than anger would have. Everett continued. My silence allowed an expectation to grow around my name. I will answer for that. Miss Whitmore will not. Clara felt something inside her loosen. He was not rescuing her from Lenora. He was accepting responsibility for the part that belonged to him. The chairman announced that the evidence would be delivered formally to the town council that night, where Harrison had already been asked to step aside pending review of the accounts, and that the bank directors had been formally notified. Margaret's loan would remain under its original terms while auditors examined whether other borrowers had been pressured. Lenora was asked to withdraw temporarily from the relief committee because of her role in spreading claims contradicted by evidence. Temporarily? Lenora repeated. Clara could have enjoyed the humiliation. Instead, she said, "Let the committee decide after the review. I asked for the truth, not revenge." Lenora looked at her then, truly looked, perhaps for the first time. Whatever answer she found made her turn away without another word. Later, as the hall emptied, Margaret stood near the coat room, holding 2 new order cards. "Mrs. Pembroke wants to restore her commission." Clara glanced at them. "Do you want it?" Margaret considered. "No," Clara smiled. "Then we decline politely. We are learning expensive habits. I learned from you." Outside, light snow drifted over Belhaven. Everett approached, but stopped at a respectful distance. "Your name is yours again," he said. Clara looked back through the open doors. Harrison gathered his papers alone. Thomas secured the records for the formal review. Eleanor stood near the committee table, the silver hawthorn embroidery of Clara's handkerchief still resting against her palm. "It always was," Clara said. Tonight they simply stopped pretending otherwise. Everett accepted the correction. After a moment, he asked, "Will you return to Alderwick tomorrow?" Clara knew the remaining gowns still needed finishing. She also knew that was not what he meant. "I will finish what I promised." And after that, the question remained between them, quieter than scandal and far more difficult. Clara looked once more toward Eleanor, still holding the handkerchief that had begun all of this. "After that," she said, "I would like the choice to be mine." Everett inclined his head. "Then I will wait for your choice." For the first time, waiting did not look like weakness on him. Clara returned to Alderwick the next morning carrying Eleanor's finished plum walking dress over one arm and no promise beyond the work itself. The house seemed different after Belhaven Assembly Hall. Not warmer, exactly, but less guarded, as though too many truths had been spoken for anyone to retreat comfortably behind old habits. Eleanor met her in the south sitting room and examined the altered seams with satisfaction. "You have rescued this dress from becoming respectable," she said. Clara smiled. "That sounds dangerously close to praise. At my age, I have earned the right to be reckless." Everett appeared in the doorway, but did not interrupt. He waited until Clara finished discussing the remaining garments before asking, "May I speak with you?" She followed him to the library. A council letter rested on his desk beside several bank documents. "Vale resigned this morning," Everett said. A preliminary review had already uncovered signs that other accounts were pressured in similar ways. The audit will continue without him. Clara absorbed the news quietly. And Lady Pierce? She left Belhaven before dawn. Her family withdrew her from the relief committee before the review could remove her formally. He paused. "I take no pleasure in either outcome." "Neither do I." Clara meant it. Justice felt cleaner when humiliation was not the reward. Everett slid another document across the desk. Thomas helped Margaret arrange for her loan to be transferred to another bank under its original terms. Clara looked up immediately. "Without Caldwell money? Without mine?" A faint warmth touched his expression. I listened. The words mattered more than a grand gesture would have. Clara read the document carefully before setting it down. "Margaret wants to expand Doyle's shop." "And you?" Everett asked. Clara hesitated. The question was simple, but years of survival had taught her that people often asked only after deciding what her answer ought to be. "She wants me to open a second workroom under my own name." "Do you want that?" "Yes." The answer came more easily than she expected. "But properly. A formal loan. Written terms. No favors hidden in generosity." Everett nodded. "Then Thomas can help you compare offers without choosing one for you." Clara looked at him. Only days earlier, even that sentence would have sounded like management. Now it sounded like restraint. "I would accept that." Silence settled between them, quiet rather than strained. Everett crossed toward the window, then stopped. "There is something else I owe you." Clara's expression sharpened. "Be careful with that word." "Not money." He almost smiled. Truth. She waited. What you did for my mother made me notice you. But gratitude is not what kept me looking. Clara said nothing. Everett continued, his voice controlled, but without the armor she had first known. I watched you refuse payment when accepting it would have been easier. Protect Margaret, even when leaving might have protected your own name. Stand inside Vale's bank when I could have spoken for you. And when you finally had the power to ruin him, you chose to protect people who had nothing to do with what he did to you. His gaze held hers. I spent years believing duty meant controlling every possible outcome. You taught me that sometimes duty means standing close enough to help and far enough away not to steal someone else's choice. Clara felt the truth of it before she could decide what to do with it. And you taught me, she said slowly, that not every offer of help has a hidden price. Everett's expression softened. Then perhaps we have both been inconvenient. Extremely. In the weeks that followed, Clara finished Eleanor's commission and secured a modest business loan from a bank outside Belhaven. Margaret became her partner rather than her employer in the new workroom, an arrangement written carefully enough to satisfy both women and detailed enough to delight Thomas. Eleanor insisted on becoming Clara's first paying customer and refused every suggested discount. Harrison Vale disappeared from Belhaven's public life while the audit continued, his influence shrinking beneath the weight of records he could no longer control. Lenora did not return that season. No one needed either of them destroyed completely for the truth to remain true. By early spring, Clara Whitmore's name had been painted in modest gold letters above the second workroom beside Doyle's shop. On the morning it opened, Eleanor arrived carrying the familiar hawthorn handkerchief she had kept since the day in the square. This has traveled far enough, she said. Clara accepted it, tracing the silver embroidery with one thumb. The cloth that had once passed between strangers had become evidence, memory, and finally nothing more dangerous than kindness freely returned. Everett stood beside her, not ahead of her. Will you dine at Alderwick tonight? He asked. Clara looked toward her new sign, toward Margaret directing a delivery boy through the doorway, then toward Eleanor, who had suddenly become very interested in the window display. Finally, Clara looked back at Everett. Yes, she said. Tonight. Everett did not ask about tomorrow. For once, he understood that one evening freely given was worth more than a future assumed. It was not a wedding promise. It was something more honest for where they had arrived, a choice freely made, with tomorrow still open. Some kindness changes a life not because it asks to be rewarded, but because it reveals who we are when no reward seems possible.